Welcome, everyone, to this Professional Development Hour presentation brought to you proudly by the Atlanta Metro chapter of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. Before we begin, we'd like to let you know that any opinions presented tonight are solely the opinions of the presenter and not that of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, or any other of its affiliates. We certainly hope you will enjoy tonight's presentation, so sit back and relax, and on with the show.
I'd be more worried about it.
All right, folks, we're going to get started with the presentation. Before we get going, I'd like to remind you to please put your phones in silence. Silent mode. And ready? So our presentation today is going to be on decoding professional ethics. Our presenter is Dr. Robert Kirkman, and he is an associate professor in the Jimmy and Rosalynn Carter School of Public Policy at Georgia Tech. He teaches and conducts research in various areas of practical ethics, including engineering ethics and environmental ethics. He received his bachelor's degree in philosophy and history from Miami University and his doctorate in philosophy from State University of New York, Stony Brook, with his specialization in environmental ethics. He has published work in engineering ethics, the ethics of technology, and the teaching and learning of practical ethics. He's also the author of The Ethics of Metropolitan Growth, Future of Our Built Environment, and Skeptical Environmentalism, The Limits of Philosophy and Science. Dr. Kirkman also shares his views on Ethics Appeal blog, his blog, and his excellence in teaching is recognized with a Hertzberg Award, Teaching Fellowship, and IHOL's Faculty Teaching Award. So please join me in giving Dr. Kirkman a warm welcome.
Thank you. As you heard, I have a background in philosophy. I meant to have a picture on here that I forgot to add to as a first slide of a machine that my dad called the Monster. My dad was an engineer, mechanical engineer, worked his entire life in the glass container industry. And when he first started with Owens, Illinois in Toledo, he got to take a tour of a plant in Illinois, and he got to see the old Michael Owens glass bottle making machine from the early 20th century. Everyone called it the Monster. It was this clattering configuration that would dip into an open pool of molten glass and produce bottles out of that. It was notoriously dangerous. I think while he was first touring this plant in Illinois, a worker on the machine was beheaded by it. So he devoted the early part of his career to helping reinvent how glass bottles are manufactured. Just basically inverted the machine, turned it around, so glass slugs were delivered from the top. And so he had a distinguished career within one company. My brothers became engineers. I was going to rebel. I became a philosopher. I fell far from the tree, but I seem to have rolled right back to it because I ended up teaching at Georgia Tech. I've been teaching engineers for the last 23 years, and it's been delightful. I've actually really enjoyed it a lot. And I have, from time to time, had the opportunity to address groups of engineers. I always find it a lot of fun just to sit and talk with you all and to tell you something about how I approach my work. But I want to start with something that you won't be able to read this. I can't read it right now. You should be familiar with this, the GSPE Code of Ethics. Just a couple of features of it that are kind of interesting. So up in the upper left there, you have a very short section called the Fundamental Canons. Those are sort of the most general principles of professional ethics. Followed by a longer section that takes up most of the rest of the page called Rules of Practice, which gets a little more specific, right, and goes through more detailed kinds of situations. Then you have Professional Obligations, which finishes this page and covers most of the next page with even more detail. like a finer grain. It's notable that several other professional societies have a different approach to a code like this. I think the IEEE's code is really just sort of general principles. It's sort of the canon rather than all the detail. And so I've always wondered about this document, like what purpose does this serve? And does this on its own help engineers to do their work ethically, to do their work responsibly? And I've had to admit to myself that the Code of Ethics has certain advantages. It serves a purpose among professional engineers. Part of its purpose is it establishes shared understanding. The code is not a one and done kind of affair. It's something that has evolved and developed over time as engineers have given it further consideration. In its earliest forms, the NSPE code had nothing about the public welfare. It was, I think, only in the 1970s, if I'm remembering correctly, that the now #1 principle, the paramount principle, is to ensure the health and safety of the public. That's something that emerged out of the self-understanding of engineers who are engaging in practice. So this is a record of that shared understanding. It also provides a basis for consistency. It's a common point of reference. So people could say, well, did you follow the canons? Did you hold paramount the safety and well-being of the public? If not, why not? And how do you, and so it gives a kind of a through line to engineering practice. It's also something you can teach to young engineers. They can come up and understand the code and work according to the code. Really important stuff. It also provides a mechanism for accountability. One of my favorite weird kind of, how to put it, internet dives. You just dive into the records of the Board of Ethical Review of the NSPE, which is case after case after case of alleged engineering misconduct as adjudicated by the Board of Ethical Review according to the codes. Fascinating reading. If you ever have a chance to dive into that, it's amazing. You lose days just reading all these cases. It's like disaster case after disaster case, a little embezzlement here, a little, conflict of interest there. It's great reading, very dramatic. It also is a basis for professional standing. So part of I think that the thing that obviously gets neglected is that the Code of Ethics also serves a public function. It says, we are the profession of engineering, this is what we stand for. And so it becomes part of the basis of a kind of contract between engineers and the wider public. And it thus is the basis for trust. And I've done some thinking about trust recently in relation to some other work I've been doing in my own research. And I started thinking about trust in technology. I love this picture. Look at this guy up here in the plaid shirt. He's just leaning against the railing ever so casually. I have no idea what the vertical distance is there. This could go down, meter. It could be, the ground could be right here. It could be much further. You can't tell from the picture. And I look at that and think, he is not imagining failure modes. He is not imagining how this structure would behave in the case of seismic activity or under a heavy wind load. The kinds of things that tend to obsess structural engineers, right? And so I've seen video, I've attended a lot of meetings with structural engineers sort of in this capacity. I've seen presentation after presentation of work with seismic simulation and wind simulation and so on. And so I have a really, really, unfortunately, very good imagination for how structures can fail. So I would not lean there I would get off that stairway as quickly as possible. But look at all these people, they're just sort of casually walking down the stairway, trusting that this structure will behave as one would expect a stairway to behave, as much as if those were concrete steps on solid ground. That's the kind of trust lay people have in technology, in engineered systems. So what is the basis for that trust? And so we entrust ourselves to engineered systems every day of our lives. In fact, increase not just our lives, but our fortunes. We're trusting like the security arrangements at our bank as we log in and do all these great transactions conveniently from home. We're trusting that the chain in between there is one that's not going to be compromised in some way. How many ways can that fail? So we trust technology all the time. I drove here on a road with other cars. How many individual acts of trust did I engage in that moment?
Hopefully zero. Hopefully zero.
Well, but
You gotta assume everybody else is out.
well, that's it. I was trusting that everyone else is doing their job. I was trusting that my car wouldn't fail, that my new tires would remain intact. That
You can control to a degree.
to a degree, but only to a degree.
That's it.
Only to a degree, because I'm still trusting that system to do its job. So I actually did some digging, again, as part of another research project I've done that's turned into work in environmental ethics again. Came across the work of a psychologist named Niklas Luhmann, who wrote a little book on trust. And he offers what he calls a functional account of trust. Our basic problem is that we don't know what's going to happen. The future is open, and there are too many possibilities. Between my home and here, I mean, I could have been struck by a meteor. I mean, I could have been, it's like the number of things that could happen, some less likely, some more likely, is unlimited. So how do we avoid being paralyzed with helpless fear? Well, Luhmann says that we have this cognitive capacity to trust. We simplify, we narrow down our range of what we expect and what we think the possibilities are on various bases. One of the most fundamental bases for a human being living in a social world is we trust people. We trust people we know, we're familiar with them, we know their patterns, we kind of know what to expect from them. We trust our households because we have some control over them and we're familiar with them. And so at a personal level, an individual level, trust is based on familiarity. The problem is, according to Luhmann, trust is also extremely fragile. And when trust breaks, it doesn't become lack of trust, it becomes distrust. And Luhmann's point is very interesting. Distrust serves exactly the same cognitive function as trust. It lets us know what to expect. Always expect the worst from this person. Always expect the worst from this household, from this particular bit of technology. Like, the door at work that never opens to my key card when it's supposed to be open. It's like, betray me once, shame on you, betray me twice, shame on me, so I just never use that door again, I go somewhere else. So distrust serves exactly the same function. But that means that for engineers, or actually for any profession, the work of which is based on trust, you're in extreme peril of losing that trust like that. Especially if it's just personal trust. But you go back to that picture, how many people while using that staircase know personally anyone involved in its design or construction? How many of you know personally anyone who is involved in the design and the construction of your car? Or of this building? Or of the bridge you drove over? Some of you might know some of these people just because of the kind of work you do, but your trust in that bridge is not contingent on your personal trust in an individual. It is, as Luhmann puts it, based on systems. When you move to a larger scale, like a society of the scale of ours, we trust systems, and that can include institutions. So we trust, civic authorities who inspect bridges. We trust, state authorities who inspect, the Department of Transportation. We trust OSHA. We trust various and so on. We also trust professions. A profession, the NSPE is an institution. The GSPE is an institution which, well, I'll get to how it works. It shapes and directs the conduct of engineers as professionals along predictable pathways so that the wider public can trust them. Also, we trust structures, so the engineer systems themselves become structures, become systems that we can trust, but only if they're rule governed, only if they behave according to rules, and if there are sanctions. If all else fails, Luhmann says that there's the law of meeting again. It's like, if you betray me or betray my trust now, I'll see you tomorrow. And then we have to live with the consequences of that. So there's a kind of enforcement mechanism in there that kind of keeps us in line. That gives us a basis for a further, not as noble a basis for trust, but it's still a basis for trust. Scale that up to a society the size of ours, we have public institutions, we have professions, we have professional organizations, which provide the rules and the sanctions, the structure that become the basis for trust. I don't have to trust individual engineers to trust engineers in general, or to trust the bridge I drove across, or my car. And Lumen points out that part of how this works for us cognitively is that there are symbols of the profession, the signature and the seal on the page. The NSPE Code of Ethics. It's a symbol that says, we can be trusted, here's our pledge. And so that I think is those I think are the advantages of the codes of ethics. Now, I teach ethics for a living. I've been teaching ethics to engineers for, well, actually 27 years, all counted, I think, even before I came to tech 23 years ago. And I found that and especially as a philosopher teaching ethics, there are certain disadvantages to just relying on the code. That's the title of this work, Decoding Ethics. Like, how do we get past the code to what's underneath it and to the underlying principles that might make it easier for engineers to make good decisions and live up to their professional responsibilities. So part of the problem is that when you have a structure that's based on rules and sanctions, it shifts motivation from inside to outside. My concern is no longer, how do I do what is right because I'm moved to do what is right? It's, how do I keep my nose clean? How do I stay out of trouble? How do I avoid getting sued? And so ethics, for many people, I've heard engineers say this sometimes, it sort of strikes despair in my soul, that ethics is just about following the rules. It's complying.
Aren't we supposed to follow the rules when nobody's
Are we supposed to follow the rules when no one's watching?
Well, I'll get to that. I think that the codes can serve as a kind of reminder. It's also versus aspiration. I put that there because I've also read other statements of ethics by other professional societies. So the Royal Academy of Engineering in the UK has a statement of ethical principles, which is fascinating reading because it's almost the diametrical opposite. The NSPE code and the other codes of US-based professional societies tend to be very legalistic. These are the rules, follow the rules. The RAE statement of ethical principles is aspirational. Here's what engineers should strive for. Here's how engineers can contribute to the public good. There's a little bit of that in the NSPE code. I don't want to completely diss the code, but there's almost nothing legalistic in the RAE statement of principles. It's just a different kind of turn on the code. So I want to move my students especially away from just thinking in terms of compliance. How do I know the rules and follow the rules so I can stay out of trouble, toward aspiration. It also puts it in terms of self-interest. How do I stay out of trouble? Not how do I protect the lives of others? How do I protect the well-being? How do I serve the best interests of my organization? It's about how do I keep my nose clean? How do I get the raise? How do I, so it's me. That's why I want to move students from thinking about themselves to thinking about others. What I tell students is, your goal as an engineer is not to avoid getting sued, is to avoid deserving to be sued. There's a difference in that. Yeah, good. Roger.
With safety. Many people are looking to make sure they're in compliance with the OSHA rules rather than are they safe?
I think that's also, yeah, and the issue here is, I think that again, one of the public functions of professional societies like the NSPE is to help to inform, like, public building codes, for example, which are the public minimal standards of safety. But there are cases where, and I'll say something about this with the codes of ethics, where the codes themselves are out of date or they're inadequate. I think the most prominent case of that is the Citicorp building case. That's the signature building of Citicorp in Midtown Manhattan. And I don't want to get too much detail on that, but it was a question of, it was an unusual design where they had to have the supporting columns in the centers of the four sides. And so basically the building started like 90 feet above grade. And so the corners, so they left a lot of empty space under the building so that a church wouldn't have to move. That's basically what it came down to. So unusual design, and the structural engineer of record, the one who signed off and put his seal on all this, was a guy named William LeMessurier, who discovered later that he had followed New York City building codes at the time regarding wind load, but someone asked a question about quartering winds, which the New York City building codes did not specify you had to test for. And so he went back and did the calculation, said, okay, if the building was constructed as designed, the building is fine. 67-story building with one of the first tuned mass dampers on a major building. It was right there in Midtown Manhattan. Then he did a little more digging because he was curious. He had this sort of itch in the back of his mind. He went back and looked and found out that in fact it had not been built as designed. Instead of through welding the supporting members, the sort of diagonal bracing system, they'd been riveted. And so he determined that as built, a Category 3 hurricane could knock over the building. A 67-story building with a tuned mass damper in Midtown Manhattan. You have not read about the collapse of that building because he managed to work out a plan to retrofit the building after it was already completed, took it to the board of the bank. They said, let's do it, and they did it. And they finished the work as a hurricane was approaching. That was an example where good enough wasn't covered by the building code. And so that LeMessurier is now held up as sort of an exemplar of how an engineer should exercise responsibility. His commitment was to the excellence of his building and his sort of professional pride in his building, but also to the safety and well-being of the public. And so he had to go past the building codes and actually think about what's good enough by my standards. So I think does that answer your question, Roger? Did that answer your question?
Yeah, mine is more of a comment.
Okay, thanks. There are also, and this actually goes back to this point, I think there are problems of application, which is sometimes the rules conflict with each other. What do you do then? Well, if it's one that involves public safety, says that's paramount, that's supposed to come first, the rules tell you. But what if it's other rules that conflict with each other? What if your boss tells you to fudge something? You're supposed to be a faithful agent or trustee of your employer. You're supposed to, this organizational obedience is a genuine value, do as directed, but also you have an obligation not to make false statements. So now you have two rules in conflict. At some point you have to step back and be able to use your own judgment and your own imagination and pull from your own motivations because the rules aren't necessarily going to help you. There's also problems of line drawing. What is a conflict of interest? There are apparent conflicts of interest and potential conflicts of interest, and how big of a conflict counts as a conflict, and in terms of how you manage it and what you do. So there's all kinds of cases where the rules don't interpret themselves. The rules don't answer questions about conflicts between rules, so you have to fall back and appeal to something deeper. The rules are useful reminders. So following the rules, all else being equal, you're going to be fine. But it's worth thinking about why you're following the rules and what to do when the rules fail you. So that's where my teaching comes in. So I say that the codes are symbols and useful reminders of professional responsibility, but they are not a sufficient basis for professional responsibility. I think, and the symbolic role has to do with its public role, its role in shaping the understanding of engineering as a profession, and the NSPE and the GSPE with it. So what I like to do is sort of peel back the layers a little bit on the codes, dig down some. So let's start with the first fundamental canon. Engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. That's been number one for a while now in these codes. Why? Why should engineers care about the public? It could just be a matter of strategic self-interest. If anyone gets hurt, I'm screwed, is basically the rule there. I'll get sued, I'll lose my job, I'll lose my reputation, whatever it is. That's one layer of why I might be motivated to look after public self-interest. Excuse me, public interest rather. Going a step further, there's also reciprocity. You're all familiar with the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. There are versions of the golden rule in cultures around the world. Again, from memory, I think it's in the Analects of Confucius has a version of the golden rule. There's something really fundamental among social beings like us about recognizing something like ourselves in others and having a response to it. And so and the reciprocity can just be, again, like an extended self-interest. I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine, but it can also go deeper than that to, again, responsiveness to others. That we actually care what happens to other people. We not necessarily know them. I mean, especially when you're working in large systems, like if you're working in civil engineering, you're dealing with engineered systems that millions of anonymous strangers may use. But if your motivating thought is that every one of those strangers is someone's son or daughter, is someone's brother or sister, and is someone's friend. It's potentially some of my own friends, but that maybe is less important in that context. But there starts to be this sort of sense of that our responsibility is to the community of other human beings. Then there's also that sense of professional pride, individual pride, the sense of well, it's that I need to be the kind of person who would follow the rules even if I'm not going to get caught, even if no one is looking. This was, well, don't need to go there. Now, philosophers, of course, have tried to take some of these sort of basic insights and build them into more formal theoretical structures. In fact, a class I'm teaching tomorrow, we're going to dig into some moral theory, like maybe like a 1-week whirlwind tour of modern moral theory. It's going to be exciting. One version of it is the principle of utility. Anyone familiar with the principle of utility? This comes from Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. It's the idea that we should seek the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Pleasure is good, pain is bad, so let's seek to optimize the amount of pleasure in the world for everyone affected by our actions. So if you take the balance sheet of an engineering decision, you take the balance sheet of an engineered system, you take the balance sheet of any action in terms of its effect, its consequences for other people. Sometimes it makes them better off, sometimes it makes them worse off. If on balance you're making people better off, that's a win morally, according to Bentham. So this, for a philosopher, this would be sort of bedrock, one of the bedrock principles. It's sometimes put in terms of the principle of beneficence, do good for others, for their own sake. Another version of this is the very scary categorical imperative. This is from the German philosopher Immanuel Kant. I would assume no one here has read Kant. You have, okay, good.
Philosophy.
Oh, mine, okay, excellent. I've come to like Kant's writing, but only because I have a PhD in philosophy and I'm just twisted in that particular way, I guess. I would say that Kant, I've sometimes said that it's almost like he was engineering his texts. He's very precise, very meticulous, uses words very precisely. constructs his arguments with incredible care. I mean, he's a remarkable mind that we have a record of. But his approach to ethics is built on what motivates us to act. And and that for an action to be right, it needs to be motivated by a principle that is universal. So what this comes down to is that you should act only on universal principles, we act morally on the basis of universal principles. What he means by that is, so we have a rule, don't lie. Why not? If I lie, I can get what I want. I want what I want. It's good for me if I get what I want, therefore I should lie. Kant's point is that only works if I'm the only one lying. And everyone else is assuming truth-telling. The only principle that can be made universal, that everyone would follow it all the time, is tell the truth. So lying is wrong because in lying, I'm treating myself as special, as somehow exempt from the rules that apply to everyone else. And Kant is basically here to tell you, you're not that special. This is my popular version of Kant's categorical imperative, which has all these very technical, act on this maxim which can through your will become a universal law, or it's like there's all kinds of complex language to it. Basically it comes down to, you're not that special, don't make an exception for yourself. The only rules that are morally binding are the ones that can be applied universally, that can apply to everyone, without exception. Don't lie, don't harm people, don't kill people. All those pass the categorical imperative test. And all this means is, an imperative is a command. This is a command with no if. It's not if you want X, you ought to do that. It's just you ought to do that. It's a command that commands absolutely without qualification. An easier to grasp version of it is, don't use people. Don't treat other people as mere means for your own ends. So it might be very tempting in a commercial context where you are making money off of other people to treat those other people as your personal ATM. And then you're going to do whatever you can to extract cash from them in exchange for whatever. So you're basically using them for your own ends. The idea of this in a professional context would be, understand that your clients and the end users of the system you're engineering are also people making decisions of their own. And that you have an obligation to respect them in their decisions. They're placing their trust in you. You have an obligation to meet them and honor that expectation. That is a legitimate expectation that they have. It's a lawful expectation. And so that would be the categorical imperative take on that first. And this is all, sounds like it's getting really technical, right? And then I could go on for hours about either of these theories, believe me. I will spare you. Saving it for my students tomorrow. We're talking about the principle of utility tomorrow. Had them read John Stuart Mill. So I actually think that there's a problem with moral theory as well. Like, I think that these theories are great. These theories help to focus attention. I treat them as, when I introduce them to students, I treat this like it's a lens, or maybe as a filter. If you examine a situation through the filter of utility, it's going to pick out all the consequences that matter, and nothing else. If you look at it through the lens or the filter of I call it autonomy, but through the lens of the categorical imperative, you'll see all the motivations and principles that matter, and nothing else. Very useful, but incomplete. There's also a problem with modern moral theory that I'm not going to get into in great depth, but it's a problem that's been discussed quite a lot by other philosophers, by moral philosophers, which is that there's a problem of motivation here. Kant is actually telling us that these abstract ideas can themselves motivate action, but they don't. What motivates action is our motivations are more like drives or impulses or emotions or something like that. So how do you connect these dry, abstract principles to actually caring what happens? Kant would say if you care, that's an inclination, that's just emotion, that doesn't really count as your duty, your obligation. It's like, that seems kind of cold. So motivation's a real problem. The problem with utility is, why would I be motivated to care about other people's pleasure and pain? John Stuart Mill has his answer to that. Henry Sidgwick has his answer to that. So there's a lot of philosophy. But I think from a sort of intuitive point of view, these don't really compel us to act. They don't move us to act. So dig a little deeper. I'm especially interested in my other work, the research I'm doing, in all the aspects of our moral lives, of our moral experience of the world that come before language, that come before principles, that come just from the fact that we are social animals living in a world together, and all the ways we recognize and respond to each other's intentions, and how I'm sort of struck and humbled by the observation, which I've gathered from recent reading in paleontology and cognitive archaeology, believe it or not, there is such a thing, that other species of our genus, so Homo erectus, for example, maintained organized societies and a consistent tool-making industry for about 1.5 million years without language. There was teaching and learning, there was improving of technology. It was all chipstone tool technology and probably some fiber technology we don't know about because that stuff didn't preserve. So part of what matters in ethics is going to be deeper than those theories are actually able to delve. See, make sure I'm okay. Yeah, step it up a little bit here. So I think of it this way. If you're thinking about doing something, there are different ways you can focus your attention. One is to think about the consequences. I'm surrounded by people. If I do something, what I do is going to have an effect on them. Is that effect going to make them better off, or us better off, or worse off? I can also think about motivation. Why am I doing this? What am I thinking about? How am I responding to others as I'm doing this? Am I paying attention to the fact that other people are like me in some ways that matter morally? There's also questions of character. So character shapes motivation. Character is, partly it's, how you behave when no one's looking. Partly it's what are the deeper kind of drives and motivations you have? What are your tendencies? When you encounter a fearful situation, do you take a breath and stand your ground to see what's going on, or do you just run? That's character as well. Character shapes motivation. It shapes what you're going to do and how you're going to respond to a situation. That's the underlying drive, but character is, in a social context, whether you fight or flee, is not just to be based on your own internal reaction, but on your understanding of the context. And the context of whether my good and the good of my community is best served by standing here and taking it, or by getting out, making a tactical retreat, or whatever it is. But also, how we act shapes our character. Aristotle says you become courageous by doing courageous actions. You become temperate by engaging in temperate actions. And so there's this kind of, you say, a virtuous circle, right? That as you develop your character, your motivations improve. As your motivations improve, your character improves. It can be an upward spiral. It can also be a downward spiral. You also degenerate. Like the more dishonest things you do, the easier it is to be dishonest, right? The more cowardly things you do, the easier it is to be cowardly, and so on. But ultimately what it comes down to is what others have called moral imagination. This is sort of a deeper level of sort of cognition. You walk into a situation, what's going on? We are able to size up a room to see what's, let's say someone were just wandering through the restaurant, they walked in here, they can immediately see some kind of meeting is going on here. Their reaction to it would change. Whether they behave well and back out quietly, where they come in and cause a scene is going to reveal something about their character and about their ability to imagine the situation they just walked into. So that's part of it. It's also understanding that you approach a situation from a particular standpoint. And it's your own standpoint. It's not some universal point of view. It's you're in the middle of the situation. And you stand in a particular place within that situation. You have a particular role in the community you're part of. You're the person who accidentally walked in, or you're the one who organized the meeting, or you're the guest speaker, whatever it is. You have a role in that situation. And that, so how you understand that situation is probably going to be directional. It's going to be indexed to your point of view. So if you're in a situation, there's a manager and an engineer and an executive, you all have different standpoints. And understanding your standpoint, understanding their standpoint is going to help you see what's going on and navigate that situation skillfully. There's also what a philosopher named Nell Noddings calls motivational displacement. That's where another person's goals, another person's intentions and projects can become my projects. When you care for someone, let's say you have, if you have children, when you're watching a child learning to walk, you feel like you're learning with them. Their successes are your successes. Their failures are your failures. If they fall and hurt themselves, you feel it in your bones. That's motivational displacement. So you're moved like from your gut to act in support of the other person's project, because their project has become, in a sense, your project. That is also a possibility of moral imagination. That's part of responsiveness to the strivings of others. It's also a basis for creativity. So you're in a situation that you've never been in before, you might have to improvise a solution. It's actually in a recent piece I wrote as part of my other research, I compare ethical decision making to musical improvisation. So you think about what's going on in the context of musical improvisation is there's lots of, the music's going on there, the chord changes that sort of underpin the whole thing, but the piano player suddenly does something interesting that you hadn't heard before, and you can pick up on it and respond to it. And you get this conversation going between you that's spontaneous, it's grounded, it's from your own point of view, it's in the moment, and it's something that's never been heard before. So I've long told my students that responding well to an ethical situation, or a situation where values are at stake, is often like that, because you have to respond in the moment, and there may not be much time, maybe between one beat and the next, the situation changes. And so your ability to tune in to that situation, and it could be, I want to go back and look at that fateful teleconference the night before the Challenger launch and think of it in those terms, in terms of how they were riffing off each other and how the tune changed as certain instruments came to dominate and so on. So that's part of it as well. But let me give you an example that I use in class. This will sort of wind it up a little bit, because I want to tell you show you how I teach this. I don't lead, when I teach engineering ethics, with the code of ethics. I may introduce the code of ethics in passing about 3 or 4 weeks into the term when we're talking about professionalism. And I tell them about the NSPE and what it means, and what having a PE means, and the kind of commitment that involves. But I'll often open the class by giving them a case study. This is a classic case study, the Senior Road Tower Collapse, 1982. I don't call it that, I just call it TV antenna. This was 1982, 2,000 foot, Houston, outside Houston, yeah. So I give them a fictionalized version of the case study, which I put in the second person. It's no longer they did this in the past, it's you are an engineer working for a firm that designed this antenna. I put it in the present tense, so they're in the middle of it. I leave it open-ended. You are on the phone with the riggers. So in brief, the situation is an engineering firm designed a 2,000 foot TV antenna, a broadcast antenna. They negotiated with the firm that would be doing the rigging on a lifting solution for the sections of the antenna that would be delivered to the site. And it was basically the crane would attach to 2 lifting lugs on the antenna, be lifted into place. And that worked fine until the last section was delivered, which already had the microwave baskets attached. And the microwave baskets interfered with the lifting solution. So they called you to ask if they could remove the microwave baskets and reattach them later. You ask your boss. Your boss says, absolutely not. Last idiots who did that damaged the baskets and cost us a fortune. It's their problem, let them solve it. If they call again, don't talk to them. They call again. It's 1982, you don't have caller ID on your phone, so you pick it up, and it's the riggers. And before you can really do anything, they say, we figured it out. And so they're going to attach a bar, a 6-foot bar, to the lifting lugs, and then attach the crane to the end of that bar. And lift the last piece of the antenna weighing, I think, several tons, into position 2,000 feet up. That's what I give the students. Now, in terms of the code, if you count the riggers or anyone who happens to be under the antenna as the public, this solution involves risk. Plus, it's one the riggers came up with themselves. They want you to check it, but you're sitting there thinking, my boss told me not to. I'm to be a faithful agent or trustee of my employer. I have a direct order from someone above me in the chain of command of my organization saying, don't get involved, it's not our problem. Now, I want to tell you this, I want to use this as sort of a story of a student who impressed me and gave me hope. So I hand this to them, and it's one sheet of paper front and back that I have this case laid out. On the back are some diagrams I pulled off a website at Texas A&M. They have this case, a still fictionalized version of the same case set out as a full-fledged disaster case. This is the model the engineers had the riggers had in mind. This is how they thought their lifting solution would work. This is a free body diagram of the actual lifting solution. Now, I'm not an engineer. That gives me the heebie-jeebies. Even I can see what's going to happen there, right? I was standing by students. The students are around there in small groups talking about this case. The student, he was an older student he'd had some work experience before he came back to school. I think he had several co-ops or internships. He turned the paper over, saw these 2 diagrams side by side, and went, no. And I thought, I can work with that. That's the beginning of moral imagination. He saw this, he saw death. He didn't see a free body diagram. He saw through it to its consequences for other people, and it mattered to him. That is the core of engineering responsibility. That is what is ultimately behind the codes of ethics. That's what you need to appeal to. Now, as it happened in the real, so as I say, I end the case with the student, with the engineer on the phone. I say, you are on the phone. What do you do? And then I give them careful instruction. Before you start coming up with ideas, remember, you're on the phone. The first part of your solution has to involve, what do you do with the phone? Do you hang it up and walk away? Go out to lunch where you don't even have a pager in 1982, so they can't contact you, right? Or do you talk? Do you go talk to the boss? So whatever solution you do has to start with you on the phone. I try to make ethics as concrete and immediate as I can for them. You're in the middle of the situation. You don't know what's going to happen. And this was long enough ago that most of them don't know what's going to happen. What actually happened was the bolts from the lifting lugs sheared off, as even I could tell they would. As the piece was approaching the top of the tower, it fell, snapped one of the cables supporting the tower. The entire tower collapsed in 11 seconds, killing 7 riggers. There is video. The TV station was so proud of their new antenna, they wanted to have a record of the lifting of the final piece, so they had cameras rolling. If you watch the footage, you can see human beings plummeting to their deaths from 2,000 feet before the cameraman basically drops his camera and tears out of there. The cameraman was fine. The riggers all died. There were pieces of the antenna buried so deeply in the ground they could not economically be, feasibly be excised. They were just cut off below grade and then graded over. And so that's the Senior Road Tower collapse. And I would often end this class session with showing the video. I warned them. I say, this is hard to watch. You're going to see something horrifying. I warned them. If you don't want to watch it, don't watch it. But I would show them the video, and they would leave the class in absolute silence. Say, okay, I'll see you next time. We'll start talking about ethics. And so that was that's how I introduced the class. Because underneath the codes is that connection of human being to human being, the concern we have for other people as people. Even if we never see them, even if we never know them, we never get to talk to them on the phone. And so that's the root of responsibility. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to stay here for a bit.
Just a caveat, just to let you know, when I'm working, I generally work in the broadcast end.
Oh,
Yeah, when I'm
I'm working in the broadcast industry, so I had a vague knowledge of that since
Yeah.
over 40 years ago.
yeah, for me, it's a useful case just because it's so compact.
been lots of those.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, with technology these days, as long as the loading was okay, nowadays they've moved on. They don't necessarily use gin poles, and they found with the recent repack and the they found even though a helicopter pull is more expensive, it benefits everybody. Safer, faster. It's like boom.
Yeah.
And they had to do hundreds of towers in a compressed time frame. In less than 10 years ago, I'll get into that some other time. Maybe a presentation for this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's one of the classic broadcast.
Yeah, and I actually.
I may actually know somebody in Houston who may have been involved or at least directly cognizant. I may know somebody in Houston who,
if not directly involved, I might know somebody who was.
In the same era, I was assigned to look at a problem machine system that was dropping on a regular basis 2,500 pounds of soaking wet corn and the vats from 10 feet in the air. And asking about records, and I was told, we don't keep records, they can be subpoenaed. This is about the same era. I asked about fatalities. There was a fatality in Pennsylvania, quote, that guy deserved to die for what he did. Well, it turns out that was a different system, but I thought, okay, this manager believes in summary capital punishment.
Or karma or something like that, some twisted version of karma, I don't know. I say not karma, but that's what people call karma anyway. Yeah. But again, I would say that it's interesting that
particular problem was exacerbated by a bunch of amateurs making incomplete fixes and transferring the failure from one place to another place to another place, and not understanding the machinery they were involved with.
And I use cases like that to underscore for students that, and I actually once taught a version of engineering ethics in collaboration with a mechanical engineer who also had experience, had training and background in design. Design and engineering don't always align very well. They're sometimes in tension with each other. She was trying to straddle that world, and then she and I taught an engineering ethics class together. We called it design ethics. And the point we tried to underscore for students is that every design decision you make is an ethical decision. You're saying, this is good enough. The operative question being good enough for what and good enough for whom. And so what I'm trying to do with my students is inform their moral imagination so they're asking those questions automatically. When they say this is good enough, they're saying, I would be okay with my grandmother trusting her life or something like whatever hook they need to have to sort of humanize it for them, make that connection for them, just so they don't think they're solving clever math problems in isolation. They recognize you get the right answer because people's lives and fortunes depend on it. And you're not satisfied with towing the line or following the code. You go beyond that to what your best judgment and the best judgment of your engineering community is about that design. So yes, go ahead.
My question is, how do you factor in the confidence you have in your own knowledge in order to make the decision? For example, and of course, classification, a professional engineer in your case would say, I am the decision maker, whereas an engineer without that license is responsible to the manager.
Right, yes. Well, I would say, I think the understanding in the literature of environmental ethics, engineering ethics, slip of the tongue, engineering ethics is that even though the PE brings with it that additional sort of public trust and public position, just working as an engineer, even with under say the industry exemption, right? And you're working within an industry, the nature of engineering work is such that there remain compelling obligations beyond your organization. That the code of ethics, even though it formally only applies to PEs, actually should be sort of like the internal operating code of anyone working in engineering. And I know that, for example, I mean, my father is an exemplar of this. He was meticulous in engineering and testing and calling out bad design. He was once involved in designing a new prototype. It had a new prototype of a glass mold. And this is one where the mold closes, slug of glass is injected, then air is injected that blows out the glass, and it's basically like automated glass blowing with a mold. And that's the system my dad helped to pioneer. He, and if I'm remembering this correctly, there was as they were prototyping it, there was a version of the prototype which did not have a panic button. Or the panic button was on the other side of the machine, if I'm remembering this correctly. And which is useless. So he insisted on the panic button being moved. He wanted it moved so that it's within easy reach of the operator. And it turned out to be a good thing he did, because he was actually working on this prototype himself with tongs, reaching in and pulling out bottles, and timing got off. So my brothers could probably know more details about this. And the hydraulic mold closed on his hand. And the tongs. Panic button. And so it opened, but it did serious damage to his hand. It took a long time for him to recover, but he might easily have lost his hand if the panic button hadn't been there. Or it might have been worse than that. So his imagination for what could go wrong and what it would mean for human beings if it goes wrong was part of what motivated him. That's why I use cases like that, of that deeper motivation when I talk about ethics with my students. And that's what I want to cultivate in my students. I want them to have that reaction like, no, that's wrong, don't do it that way. That's visceral. Then they can turn that to action. Say, no, we got to fix this, and then work on how to fix it.
Are you seeing with the advancements of technology and the more reliance on technology? I mean, we're using more systems, more computers that just put the numbers together for us.
Mm-hmm.
Is there becoming more of a gap on engineering ethics?
This is something that concerns me a lot. And actually, yeah, go ahead. Okay, so the question was with the development of technology, especially sort of, I assume you mean like artificial intelligence or
I mean, it's not, you can go with the AI route. You can even to just go with the general, we're relying on more systems and more technology that's piecemealing stuff together for us, and we're just plug and play with it, and not necessarily, and especially as I'd say this is personally from students learning with the technology versus having to manually learn how it all worked and was interconnected. Is there, and now there's more the gap of you just take it, plug and play, and don't necessarily understand exactly how and why it worked. So you're gonna run with it because that's what you know, and you never really understood it in the first place.
I once wrote a fictional case study for a class of a young engineer who was given a project sort of just beyond his competence. And his company was sort of testing out and sort of experimenting with a structural engineering support software system where the software would do a lot of the calculation and a lot of the modeling and all that stuff sort of automatically for you. And he managed to cobble together the design for this project he'd been given. And he realized, and this was before it was approved, and basically the word of the company was, don't do anything with this until it's been formally approved. We're just testing it out now. He went ahead and did this, and then just as he finished the design, the word comes down that it's approved for use, that they could use it. But here he is stuck with a design which looks okay to him, but he couldn't explain it. He couldn't tell you why. And so it was like, what am I trusting? Am I trusting this software suite, or am I trusting the judgment of an engineer? Because the software suite doesn't care. I don't know who the programs were of the software suite. They may not care either. And that could be riddled with errors, or could be like the old Pentium, right? Where there was like the original Pentium. Yeah, there's that one, decimal point flaw that throws everything off. You have no idea. And so what are we trusting exactly? And so I'm very concerned about that, because I think, and this is what I tell students about AI, even just in writing. It's like, if you are allowing AI or any computer system to be a substitute for your judgment, you're making yourself obsolete. You're telling the world, because as an engineer, as I tell my students, as an engineer, what you have to offer the world, your stock in trade, is your informed judgment. If you can't even offer that, if all you're offering is prompt engineering or clever cobbling together or button pushing, I could do that. I could design an airport for you tomorrow if I had a system like that and I could figure out how to use it. Well, maybe it'd be a week to figure out the system. Then I could come up with something for you. I wouldn't have the slightest idea what it was. I wouldn't have the slightest idea it was safe. I would never sign my name to it or put my seal on it. Because ultimately it comes down to, what does that signature and seal mean? It means I endorse this with my own judgment. I can explain what happened. So I'll tell you that my dad did all his work in glass container manufacture with a slide rule and a T-square. And not that there's like some inherent virtue in that, but he had to know his stuff. He had to know what he was dealing with. It's possible to have the calculator. It's possible to do that with AI, I think. But it's managing your relationship as a professional with that technology that is really the key thing, I think. And it is perilous. I think it's something we need to pay attention to in the training of engineers. Yeah.
Always remember about computers. If a 1 is a 0 in reality, you don't get the right answer.
Yeah.
Anywhere you have a 0 or 1 out by one character, you don't have the right answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and garbage in, garbage out too. That's the other thing, right?
Got one last question.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious. I know you talked about the ethics part, but you know how sometimes when you specify a product or something, and let's say you have like 5 competitors, and then let's say some engineer, because I do a lot of where I design buildings, such as like this restaurant, where you could have lighting if you have 5 vendors, but let's just say one vendor may try to take this person out to lunch, and now this engineer's going to get swayed, and then they're going to say, let's just take him out to like some nice steakhouse or something, and then now he's picking this sales rep for every project. I just don't know what type of implications that would be by doing that.
Well, yeah, I think the implication is that, again, if your stock in trade is your judgment, and your judgment is being swayed by some outside interest, that's what a conflict of interest is. And that's something that's like expressly forbidden in the codes. It's also something that is regulated within organizations. So if I'm working with vendors, I'm supposed to specify the part that is going to do the best job on balance, right? Balancing quality against cost and the other considerations. But I'm going to use my judgment to determine what's the best vendor to go with. If I even give the impression that my judgment has been swayed by a lavish lunch at a nice restaurant, I'm undermining the trustworthiness of my profession. I'm undermining the trustworthiness of engineering as such, and that on its face is wrong. Because again, think about it from the public's point of view. It's like you trust your doctor to prescribe medication you need and nothing more. But you walk into the doctor's office and there's a clock from a particular pharmaceutical company advertising a certain brand of prescription medication. The notepad on the counter advertises another brand of medication. You see a pharmaceutical rep walking out with a briefcase that had been full of goodies that's now empty. Your doctor tells you, prescribes to you something that's on one of those notepads. You think, now do I really need this? Or is my doctor swayed by that smooth talking pharmaceutical rep? That erodes trust in the medical profession. So that's the dynamic there. Again, engineering is based on trust. Engineering, like any profession, anything that undermines that trust undermines the capacity of engineers to do anything good in the world.
Because unfortunately that has happened before.
Oh, it happens all the time.
Where because they took them out to like, I don't know, just like Ruth's Chris Steakhouse or something, and they suddenly now they put something in there where it says no substitution allowed, just to favor that rep.
Yeah, and that's an overt conflict of interest, or at least that's a apparent conflict of interest.
As a point of information, under the Georgia rules, engineers are not allowed to take a commission on any product they recommend. Also, engineers are not allowed to pay a commission for someone who finds them work, unless that person is a direct employee, and that is the terms of the employment.
Yeah, and that's where the institution sort of steps in to put guardrails around the conduct of professionals so that the profession as a whole maintains its trustworthiness. People slip through that and get away with all kinds of things, but that's why those cases have to be addressed as something that in your own thinking about the work and your own interactions with peers, that's something to pay attention to. It's like, and not necessarily to police it, but just be mindful of it, avoid it yourself. If someone else gets into a conflict of interest, the minimum responsibility is to disclose that conflict of interest. Because sometimes you can't help a conflict of interest. So if one of my kids had gone to Georgia Tech and ended up in one of my classes, I'd have an apparent conflict of interest. Actually, a parental conflict of interest, right? I would have to disclose that and manage it somehow. Either they have to move to a different section of the course, or I'd have to have someone else do the grading or something. We'd have to work out some arrangement. So sometimes you can't avoid a conflict of interest, but you can manage it. Like a judge recusing herself or himself from a case where there's an interest. Anyway, I think that's it. So,
as you said, you can go. Here's a token for appreciation.
All right, thank you. Oh, great. Something from my desk.
Thank you very much again.
Appreciate it. Thank you all.
All right, folks.
We hope you enjoyed this presentation given at one of the Atlanta Metro Chapter meetings of the Georgia Society of Professional Engineers, an affiliate of the National Society of Professional Engineers. To find out more about us or to join us, check us out at gspe.org.